So hello and welcome everyone to our short conversation about animal and environmental law. This informal interview is part of our International Week, a week dedicated solely to activities in foreign languages. I'm your host, Clóvis Malinverni. I'm a professor of environmental law. And today I have the privilege of talking to a truly remarkable person, our professor, David Nathan Cassuto. Cassuto he's not only a distinguished professor at Pace University, but he's also a respected judge. I would say an internationally recognized scholar in animal law and environmental law. So welcome, Professor. We are honored to have you here.
Obrigado vocês. Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
So before we dive into your work, I want to share a personal note with our audience. Back in late 2018 and the beginning of 2019, I had the privilege of being a visiting scholar at Pace University, working under the supervision of Professor David. It was a great experience for me. I not only learned from your writings and lectures and the conversations we had, but also had the pleasure of spending Christmas night with your family. And it was such a warm and unforgettable moment. So I thank you for that. And now let's explore your academic expertise in animal law and environmental law. Can you share a bit about your academic journey, Professor? How did you end up specializing in animal law and environmental law? What inspired you to dive in these two fields?
I started off in going to school for literature. In fact, my PhD is in literature. And while I was studying literature, I've always been very interested in environmental issues. I've always been very interested in issues related to animals. And I was looking for a way to blend those two things, and I ended up doing my PhD on literature and science, applied ecology, environmental studies, that kind of thing. And so my dissertation was very much about the cultural studies component of law and policy. And when I became an English professor, it was clear to me that I needed to be better at the policy and legal part of what I do. And so I ended up going to law school. After practicing for a while, I ended up teaching law at Pace. And I had the opportunity to teach an animal law course. I'd always come to animal issues through the lens of environmental issues. But in the process of learning to teach animal law, I became much more familiar and interested in the ethical issues as well, the jurisprudence of animals as such, animals as beings with their own rights, separate and apart from their integral membership in our environment. That's how I ended up doing what I do and thinking about what I think about.
Talking about animal law really seems to have experienced a surge in academic interest over the last decade, at least in Brazil. Could you give us an overview where the field stands today? What progress has been made, in your opinion, and what challenges remain for our legal systems?
I mean, it's hard to say where the field is because it's so. One of the things about animal law is it's a young discipline. I always tell my students when I teach animal law that all law is animal law. There's an animal law component to every area of law. Animal law is constitutional law. Animal law is property law. Animal law is civil procedure. It's every area, tort law. Every area of law has an animal law component. So it really depends on what we're talking about when we talk about the state of the field. But I think, if I may, I think you're asking a lot about what the status of animals today is within the legal system. And I think there's been a lot more thought devoted to it in the last 10 or 15 years in Brazil and in a lot of South America and in other parts of the world as well, including the United States, although I would say the United States is lagging behind in its approach to animals as beings entitled to a certain dignity right. I think there are other countries, including Brazil, that are making more progress recognizing the importance of animals as animals. That being said, recognizing the importance of animals as animals has not, in my opinion, translated to a better world for animals, better treatment, better relationship between humans and non-humans. There's still a great deal of horrific abuse. I don't see a trend away from that. I'd like to be able to say I did, but I don't. I think there's been important progress made in thinking about animals, and indeed also in passing laws and even constitutional amendments recognizing animals. But I don't see a lot of actual policy initiatives that are improving the lives of animals.
So this leads to one of your recent and deeply impactful pieces, which is powerless beings, solitary confinement of humans and non-humans in America, which was recently republished in our journal, the journal I had the honor of editing here in our graduate program. And in this article, you draw parallels between solitary confinement experienced by incarcerated humans and captive non-humans. What is the most challenging aspect for the legal system when grappling with the suffering of powerless beings across species, and how could the law better protect them?
The biggest challenge when grappling with the issue of powerless beings being abused by the legal system is the indifference towards them, and that's both humans and non-humans. Nobody cares, and that's part of the reason they're pushed into places where nobody sees, and because of that, it's out of our sight, out of our mind. We don't think about it, and even to the extent, now I'm going to talk about humans for a second, to the extent that we do think about humans, for example, in solitary confinement, there's a large number of people who just say, well, they deserve it. They're criminals. There are other people who are more needful of protection. This is not a priority for us. And that's an understandable approach, but it's, in my opinion, flawed for several reasons. One is a lot of the people who are in solitary confinement don't deserve it at all. They're either being tortured for no reason, or even if they did horrible things. In my opinion, again, there is no good legal reason or ethical reason to torture somebody just because they did something bad. Torturing somebody doesn't fix the horrors that they did. So all those things add up to an ethical and legal imperative not to mistreat people in solitary confinement. And then when you talk about animals, for me, the question gets a lot easier because animals are innocent. They haven't done anything. To confine animals in this way is to take an innocent being and torture them for no other reason than that it might theoretically have some benefit to humans. That's not a good reason. This, torture, if we think torture is wrong, then torture is wrong no matter who we're torturing. But yet we put them in laboratories or somewhere else where we just don't see them and we don't really think about them, and so it's not really remarked upon.
In another article called "Don't Be Cruel Anymore: A Look on the Animal Cruelty Regimes in the United States and Brazil," you analyzed the limitations of anti-cruelty laws, particularly concerning agricultural animals. You proposed in this article a creation of an independent animal welfare agency. How could an independent agency or similar reforms improve animal welfare without relying heavily on litigation?
One of the big reasons that I think an agency would be helpful is because the current regulatory regime, it has a different agenda than animal protection. So in the United States, for example, it's the Department of Agriculture that regulates animal welfare for agricultural animals. The Department of Agriculture has one mission, and that's to make agriculture more efficient and more profitable in the United States. That is, and animal protection in many instances runs counter to that. So there's there's this dissonance in the regulatory mission of the agency. And so the welfare of animals is really ignored. In fact, it's not even addressed. And so that if there were an animal welfare agency whose sole purpose was to regulate animal welfare, then there would be some oversight of how, for example, agriculture treats animals. And that oversight would come from people who are not captive to the agricultural industry. The same is true in Brazil. It's different the way the regulatory structure works, but there's still that same lack of attention to animals as animals. There's the emphasis on profitability, and expanding the agricultural footprint so that there's more food for people. And more food for people is a noble goal, I think, but it doesn't have to be animal.
Moving to environmental law a bit. In your study, Water Law in the United States and Brazil, Climate Change and Two Approaches to Emerging Water Poverty. This article, it's a comparative analysis of legal systems grappling with water scarcity. And then I ask you, what are the key lessons US and Brazil can learn from each other regarding its legal frameworks for managing these critical resources like water?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I guess I would say that there is a bilateral need, there's an international need to recognize that water is a scarce resource. And in fact, since we wrote that article, the scarcity of water has only become more pronounced. In the United States, water scarcity has cultural issues underlying it. And in fact, that's part of what I studied in my graduate years. In Brazil has 8% of the world's fresh water, and yet still is facing water shortages. What we're looking at is a limited resource, expanding populations, and also a changing climate that is going to make these issues only that much more pronounced. So these are the things that the two countries collectively and individually must face. And I think, just to answer your question more directly in terms of what the two countries can learn from each other, I think they can see both. They can look at the way each country handles its water resources and see what the problems are, and then work towards a way in this new era of increased water scarcity and climate change to manage water resources in a way that provides water to all beings. Again, I'm now adding an animal law component to it. In Brazil, for example, the Constitution speaks directly to the right of animals to water. The United States sadly doesn't have such a provision, but I don't see a lot of action in Brazil around that particular provision. So these are the kind, the regulatory imperative is there in both countries, and the lack of focus on making sure water is available both for habitat and for use is the most urgent challenge.
I would say that the environmental law in Brazil has this problem: many laws and few actions. Now I will ask you some questions sent by our students, our master and doctoral students. In an interview with Brazilian site Animais, you mentioned feeling a cautious hope that a more just society will one day take shape. Do you still maintain this view in recent years, considering the intensification of armed conflicts, increasing erosion of democracy, the deepening impact of artificial intelligence on young people, etc.?
I think the Jus Animalis people caught me on a hopeful day. I'm not by nature an optimist. On the other hand, and this is something I really want to emphasize for your students, and it's the same thing I tell my students, which is things are desperate. We are in desperate times, and they have gotten much more desperate. And you mentioned the erosion of democracy worldwide, and I would even put it more strongly, the encroaching fascism. These are challenges that can't be ignored. Climate change, again, being something that is driving an international catastrophe. These are desperate times. But what I say to students, and I believe it very strongly, and which is, when times are desperate, when you are with your back against the wall and the enemy is massed in front of you and they are vastly outnumbered, you have two choices. You can give up or you can fight like hell. And there's only one, in my opinion, there's only one right answer there.
Mhm.
Now is the time to fight like hell. Whether or not we win, fighting is better than not fighting. And it's the only way, it's the only chance we have.
You know better than I that our Brazilian Supreme Federal Court banned cockfighting and bull running, which is farra do boi, on the grounds of violating animal welfare. In Brazil, in this matter at least, the position of the courts is very different from the legislators. In your view, what is the role of the judges in animal protection? Because in Brazil we have this discussion: what are the limits to a judge? Can he be creative in these matters to advance the legal system? What will be the role of the judiciary?
The role of judges, I think, is pretty straightforward, both here and there. The role of judges is to interpret and apply the law. And it's not really a matter of creativity. In Brazil, with the farra de boi and the vaquejada and all issues related to animal protection, there's this issue of also there's the cultural patrimony. So there's there's weighing two issues. But to me, that is what judges are supposed to do. They're supposed to look at the competing legal imperatives and apply the law in the most just fashion possible. In my opinion, and I don't really know, I don't understand the arguments against this. When there is a cultural tradition that is inherently cruel and there is a constitutional imperative not to be cruel, it seems to me that's not a difficult question. The cultural patrimony, cultures evolve. All cultures evolve. And that is something that, traditions are not wonderful just because they're old. Traditions are worthy of reverence if indeed they are important and valued parts of our evolution as people and a culture. So I don't think it's being creative to enforce the law in a way and to apply the Constitution in a way that protects animals. And I would say the same thing here. I would say judges have a duty. Judges can't just decide what, to make up something that's not there, but judges can apply the law in a way that is ethical and equitable.
What's your position? I know, but our audition don't. What's your position about the zoos?
Zoos are a very interesting question. Well, let me just say this. We were speaking of equity. Equity means that you apply the law fairly in an individual instance, right? So there may be, zoos, what we think of as zoos, which is keeping animals for humans to come and see, just to enjoy looking at animals in captivity. To me, there's no good reason for that. On the other hand, zoos perform an important function in terms of preserving species and also rehabilitating animals that have been injured or what have you. And so there's a trade-off there. And because the way zoos fund themselves is partially through people coming to see them. So I understand that there is a problematic component to zoos, but also there are zoos, not all zoos by any means, but there are zoos that serve an important function both culturally and for animal well-being. So it's a difficult question that needs to be, you need to look at each instance and come to a conclusion about that particular zoo in that particular instance.
Professor, I'm curious about your view on the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the COP30 in Brazil this next November. How do we assess the importance of this event, and what would be the impact of the absence of the United States, especially? And if you are comfortable with that, can you talk a bit about Donald Trump's drill, baby, drill policy?
Well, with respect to the COP, this is a very important COP because it is the first one since the ICJ ruling yesterday, saying that there is a duty under international law to for each member nation to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So there is a legal imperative now that is much stronger than the suggestions in the Paris Accords. So this COP should have, I hope, should take up this issue with some vigor. We'll see. I'll just do a sidebar here. PACE, the Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law, as well as BAILE, my institute, the Brazil-American Institute for Law and Environment, as well as a number of Brazilian, as well FGVs in Rio, and a number of Brazilian bar associations. We're sponsoring a side event that will take place both in Belém and in Rio. We are trying to stress the importance of this COP for all the reasons we're speaking of. In terms of the United States absence, I don't know what one can say that isn't really obvious to the international community. The United States is not just an outlier, but is a perpetrator of some of the most serious climate exacerbation that is happening. So the Trump policies are oblivious to science. They are very unfortunate, and they are part of what is this global phenomenon that we spoke of earlier, that is simply heedless of the impacts of human action on humanity as well as the world.
Well, Professor, our last two questions are advice questions in terms of research and career opportunities, things like that. What are the emerging challenges and opportunities in the intersection between the animal law and international law? What will be the main subject to research now in 2025? And the last question, what practical advice would you offer for navigating a career that blends legal practice, academia, and commitment to justice for humans and non-humans, and how to balance these many roles?
Well, so in terms of the most important areas of research, I think the first thing I would say, the first piece of advice I would give to anybody who is embarking on a legal career, is that you should study, think, and work in an area that you care deeply about. You should work on things that are important to you. And if you're studying environmental law, it's because the environment is important to you. So find something within that about which you feel strongly, and get very, very good at it, because that to me is the key to effective legal practice. It's important to have an overall understanding of the law and be generally expert in the law, but also if you want to really contribute in a particular area that you care about, you have to really put in the time to acquire a deep expertise in it. Because there are all kinds of people, and certainly with artificial intelligence, there are all kinds of machines that can answer questions for people. We're not paid for what we know. We're paid to figure things out. And the way we figure things out is by really understanding the problem. And that's something that machines can't do. We understand the implications of things socially, culturally, and environmentally. And the more you know, the more you know. As well as the more you know how little you know. And that too is a difference between us and artificial intelligence. So a certain humility as you approach the profession and you approach the work that you do is important. If you bring humility, a commitment to justice, and a passion for learning to the practice of law, you will serve the profession, and by doing so, you will serve the world in a way that will bring great honor on your endeavors. And with respect to your last question, I would again just say this: it's a version of what I just said. Find something within this discipline that you care so much about that you love to get up in the morning and go to work. Don't just work to work. Find a way to love what you do and to feel when you open your eyes in the morning that you're glad to be doing what you do, and when you close your eyes at night, glad to have done what you did. And at the end of your life, when you close your eyes, you can feel good about the life you led. That, I guess, would be my best advice.
That's right. Professor, This has been an insightful and thought-provoking conversation, and you are also a friend, as I consider this way. And so we're so grateful. I would like to thank you again. If you want to say some final words in English or in Portuguese, I know you speak Portuguese as well.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all, and of course, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I hope I see you sometime soon. É uma das honras da minha vida estar aqui com vocês e agradeço a oportunidade, né?
Muito obrigado, professor. Obrigado a todos pela audiência. Muito obrigado.
Vocês também. Tchau.